My wife said at a small restaurant in Chicago. I feel like our story reached its chapter end. I closed the checkbook, resigned from a comfortable position, launched a risky opportunity abroad, and months later, she asked when everything changed. I feel like our story reached its chapter end. She said it so quietly that I almost didn't hear it over the sound of the jazz musician playing 3 tables away. Almost. But I heard it perfectly. Every single syllable. I set the pen down on the checkbook without signing. I didn't look up right away. I just sat there, staring at the number on the bill, $47.20, and I thought about how strange it was that the last real moment of my marriage had a price tag that specific. The candle between us flickered. The restaurant was one of those intimate little spots on North Wells Street. Exposed brick walls, mismatched wooden chairs, a chalkboard menu that changed every week. Nora had picked it. She always picked the restaurants. I used to think that was endearing. Sitting there in that moment, I realized I had let her pick everything for a very long time. I finally looked up. She was holding her wine glass with both hands, not drinking from it, just holding it like it was something she needed to grip. Her eyes were steady, not wet. Not angry, just steady. That steadiness was somehow the worst part. What does that mean? I asked. My voice came out quieter than I intended. She tilted her head slightly, the way she did when she thought a question didn't deserve a full answer. You know what it means, she said. I looked back down at the checkbook. $47.20. 9 years. The math didn't make sense. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. I was 34 years old. Nora was 32. We had been married for 6 years, together for 9. I was a mid-level operations manager at a logistics consulting firm downtown, the kind of job that paid well enough to be comfortable, but not well enough to feel exciting. We lived in a clean 2-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, drove sensible cars, took 1 vacation a year to places that were photogenic but never truly adventurous. From the outside, we looked like a perfectly assembled life. From the inside, from where I was sitting across from Nora that night, it looked like something that had been assembled perfectly and then left on a shelf to collect dust. But I didn't know that yet. Or maybe I did, and I just hadn't allowed myself to say it out loud. I signed the check. I don't know why that detail matters, but it does. I signed it, closed the booklet, and placed it at the edge of the table. Then I looked at her. Are you sure this is what you want? I asked. She nodded once. Not dramatically, not with tears, just once, the way you nod when someone asks if you want the last piece of bread. Simple. Decided. I've been sure for a while, she said. How long? I asked. She looked out the window at the street, where a couple walked past holding hands, laughing at something between them. A while, she said again. That was the most honest thing she said to me all evening. The vagueness wasn't cruelty. It was just the truth. She genuinely couldn't pinpoint it, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. I respected that, even then. Even in that specific, crushing moment. We left the restaurant without arguing. We drove home in separate silences. She went to the guest room. I sat in the kitchen until 2 in the morning, not thinking about the marriage as much as I expected. I was thinking about the pen. About the moment I set it down without signing. About how that one small action, that pause before writing my name, had felt more honest than anything I'd done in at least 2 years. The next 3 weeks were surgical. That's the only word for it. Nora and I had always been functional people. We didn't throw things. We didn't scream. We divided the apartment into invisible zones and moved through our shared space like 2 professionals who had been assigned to the same project they both knew was ending. She called her mother the second morning. I heard her through the wall, her voice low and controlled, and I noticed she didn't cry until she thought I'd left for work. I hadn't left yet. I stood in the hallway for 30 seconds, listening to her finally fall apart in a way she hadn't allowed herself to in front of me, and something in my chest pulled tight and then released. Like a knot being cut, not untied. At the office, I performed normalcy with impressive precision. Weekly reports, client calls, Tuesday staff meetings where I sat at the left side of the conference table and took notes in my blue notebook and said things like, let's circle back on that, and we need to revisit the Q3 projections. My manager, Callahan, noticed something was off around day 4. He called me into his office and asked, in that careful way managers ask personal questions, whether everything was all right at home. I told him things were fine. He nodded like he believed me. He didn't believe me. Neither did my coworker Tom, who had known me since we'd started at the company within the same month 5 years earlier. Tom cornered me by the coffee machine on a Thursday morning. "You look like someone who's making a decision," he said. "Everyone makes decisions," I said. "Not like this," he said. He poured his coffee and walked away without pressing further. That was one of the things I valued about Tom. He understood that some conversations only need one sentence. The decision he'd noticed was forming slowly, the way weather forms, not in a single moment, but in a gathering of small conditions that eventually become impossible to ignore. I had received an email 3 weeks before the restaurant. I hadn't told Nora about it. I hadn't told anyone about it. It had come from a man named Victor Eldane, a former industry contact I had met at a conference in Atlanta 2 years prior. Victor had moved to Lisbon 18 months ago to launch a small logistics consulting startup focused on European port operations. His email was brief and direct. He was expanding. He needed someone who understood operations management from the ground up. The pay was restructured equity plus modest salary. The risk was real. The location was permanent. He had thought of me. I had read the email twice, closed my laptop, and not thought about it again for 3 full weeks. That was a lie I told myself. I thought about it every single day. But I had been married, comfortable, building a sensible life in Lincoln Park, and the email from Victor existed in a category I had quietly labeled things that are for a different version of me. After the restaurant, I opened it again. I read it a 3rd time, then a 4th. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed and lay there in the dark of the bedroom that Nora had vacated, staring at the ceiling with the strange, untethered feeling of someone who had just been told a door he thought was permanent had always been a temporary wall. I want to be clear about something. What I did next was not about Nora. It was not a reaction to her, or a punishment, or a strategy to make her reconsider. I've had to say this to several people since then, and they always look at me with that slight skepticism that means they only half believe it. That's fine. I know what it was. It was the first thing in years that I did entirely because of myself. Not because it was expected, not because it fit the plan, not because Callahan would nod approvingly, or because it made the apartment in Lincoln Park make more financial sense. Just because when I read Victor's email a 4th time, something in me that had been very quiet for a very long time said, this. I replied to Victor on a Saturday morning. I told him I was interested. I told him my situation had recently changed. I told him I could be available within 60 days. He replied in 4 hours. He said, "I was starting to think you'd never write back. Let's talk Monday." We talked Monday, and Tuesday, and the following Thursday. By the end of those conversations, I had a loose framework for what the role would look like, what the equity structure meant in realistic terms, and what Lisbon would demand of me logistically. It would demand a lot. That felt correct. I told Callahan on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after my first reply to Victor. I requested a private meeting, closed his office door, and sat across from him in the chair I'd sat in 4 months earlier when he'd praised my last quarterly performance review. "I'm resigning," I said. He blinked. "Effective 30 days, I said. "I want to be fair about the transition." He leaned back in his chair and studied me for a long moment. "This is about the situation at home," he said. "Partially," I said. "Mostly it's about an opportunity I've been offered that I think I'd regret not taking." "Where?" "Lisbon," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Portugal," he said, not as a question. "Portugal," I confirmed. He exhaled slowly through his nose, the exhale of a man who was calculating something and arriving at a number he hadn't expected. "That's a significant move," he said. "I know," I said. "We'd hate to lose you." "I know that too," I said. "I appreciate everything this company gave me. I mean that genuinely." He stood and extended his hand across the desk. We shook hands. The handshake felt different than I expected. It felt like something completing rather than something ending. I walked back to my desk, sat down in my ergonomic chair, and looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. Gray winter sky, the geometry of office buildings, a water tower in the middle distance, and felt something I can only describe as the specific weight of a room you are about to permanently leave. Nora and I had continued to coexist in the apartment through this entire period. We had agreed, quietly and without formal discussion, to give each other 60 days before making any major moves on the living situation. The legal side of things was being handled by 2 attorneys who communicated so professionally that the whole process felt less like a marriage ending and more like a business partnership dissolving. I had told her about the resignation before I told Callahan. Actually, I don't know why I did it that way. Maybe because it felt dishonest not to. Maybe because after 9 years, she still deserved to hear significant news directly from me rather than through a mutual network. I told her over breakfast on a Tuesday. She was eating yogurt, standing at the kitchen counter, scrolling through something on her phone. "I'm resigning from the company," I said. She looked up. "When?" "I'm telling Callahan tomorrow." She put her phone face down on the counter. "Why?" she asked. "I've been offered something in Lisbon." "A beat." "Lisbon," she said. "Portugal." She looked at me for a long moment with an expression I couldn't fully read. Something that was not quite surprise and not quite recognition. Something between the two. "When did this happen?" she asked. "The offer came in about 6 weeks ago," I said. "I didn't know if I was going to take it until recently." She nodded slowly. Then she picked up her phone and her yogurt and walked to the other side of the kitchen. "Okay," she said. "Just okay." I stood there for a second. "That's all you want to say?" I asked. She turned back to look at me. "What would you like me to say?" she asked. Not unkindly, just genuinely. I didn't have an answer for that. "Nothing," I said. "You're right. Never mind." I poured my coffee, and we stood in the kitchen in the quiet that had become our primary language, and I thought about the jazz musician in the restaurant, and the candle that kept flickering, and the $47.20, and I felt the strange peace of someone who had finally stopped waiting for the story to make sense and had simply started walking toward the next sentence. My last day at the firm was on a Friday in February. There was a small send-off in the conference room. Decent cake, some genuine warmth, a card that 7 people had signed with varying levels of sincerity. Tom hugged me at the elevator. That surprised me. Tom was not a hugger. "Don't be an idiot over there," he said. "Define idiot," I said. "Don't play it safe," he said. "That's the only kind of idiot that matters." The elevator doors opened, and I stepped in. "I'll try," I said. He nodded once. The way you nod when one sentence is enough. The doors closed. I rode down 42 floors in silence. When I walked out of the lobby onto Michigan Avenue, the February wind hit me immediately, cold and blunt, and completely indifferent to the fact that this was a significant moment. Chicago winters are like that. They don't care about your narrative. I walked 6 blocks before hailing a cab, not because I needed to, but because I needed the cold air and the noise of the city and the particular feeling of pavement under my feet on a day that no longer had a predetermined destination. I moved out of the Lincoln Park apartment on a Saturday in early March. It was efficient. Nora and I had already divided things with the same surgical precision we'd applied to everything else. I took the books, my desk, the leather chair from the study, the kitchen items we'd agreed were mine, and the framed photograph of the coastline in Big Sur that I had bought on a solo trip before I'd met her. She kept the rest. She kept most of it. I didn't mind. Objects carry the weight of the context they're stored in, and I was trying to travel light. I stayed at Tom's place for 2 weeks. He had a spare room and the wisdom not to ask too many questions in the evenings, which was exactly what I needed. We ate takeout. We watched basketball. We argued about whether Chicago deep dish was pizza or just a very ambitious casserole. It was the most unbothered I had felt in years. Victor had been patient throughout all of this. He had given me the time I needed without withdrawing the offer, which told me something important about him as a business partner. We had refined the role significantly over our calls. I would be heading up their North-South Atlantic corridor operations, essentially building the client acquisition and operational framework for their expansion into North American port partnerships. It was the kind of work that had no roadmap yet, no previous template, no quarterly review criteria that had been designed by someone above me who had already predetermined what success looked like. That terrified me. And I mean that in the specific way that terror and desire can occupy the same exact space inside you, where you can't quite tell them apart. My flight to Lisbon was booked for the 2nd week of March. Victor had arranged a furnished apartment in the Moraria neighborhood for my first 3 months, after which I would find my own place. I had 1 large suitcase, a carry-on, a laptop bag, and the photograph of the Big Sur coastline, which I had carefully wrapped in a sweater to protect it. That was everything I was carrying into the next chapter. I won't pretend the flight was some cinematic turning point where I looked out the airplane window and felt my past dissolve into the clouds below. It was a 9-hour flight. I ate a mediocre chicken dish. I watched 1 movie I don't remember. I slept badly. I landed in Lisbon in the early morning, cold, clear, the light doing that specific thing it does in Southern Europe where it arrives at angles that don't exist in the Midwest. Victor picked me up from the airport himself. He was a tall, thin man in his early 40s, with the kind of permanent energy that people have when they're doing exactly the work they were designed for. He shook my hand in the arrivals hall and said, "You look like you need coffee and 20 minutes of silence." "In that order?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "Then we'll talk." We drove through the city toward Moraria as the morning opened up around us. The old buildings in terracotta and yellow, the trams that looked like they'd been running since before I was born, the river in the distance catching the early light. I said nothing. Victor kept his word and gave me the silence. After 20 minutes and a strong espresso at a small cafe where he clearly knew the owner, he leaned across the table and said, "Are you ready to actually work?" "Yes," I said. "Good," he said, "because what we're building doesn't exist yet, and that means the first 3 months are going to feel like controlled chaos." "I've had practice with chaos recently," I said. He looked at me with the careful attention of someone who had received information he filed away without commenting on. "Let's begin," he said. The first month was exactly what he'd described. The office was a converted warehouse space near the waterfront. Concrete floors, long work tables, a small kitchen that was always stocked with espresso, and not much else. There were 6 of us in total. Victor, myself, a financial analyst named Petra who was from Vienna and had the focused energy of someone who calculated risk the way other people breathe, a logistics software engineer named Bruno who barely spoke, but produced more usable work in a week than any team of 3 I had previously managed. A Portuguese-American translator and cultural liaison named Catarina, who seemed to know everyone in the city and communicated entirely through slightly raised eyebrows and meaningful silences. And a young operations assistant named Felipe, who had graduated 18 months prior and approached every problem with a disproportionate enthusiasm that was, somehow, never annoying. We were building a client acquisition strategy from scratch. We were cold calling Port Authority contacts in Baltimore, Charleston, and Houston. We were writing operational frameworks at 11 at night and revising them at 6 in the morning. We were making small, significant mistakes and correcting them faster than any larger company could have. I was working harder than I had worked in at least 5 years. I was going to bed exhausted in a way that felt productive rather than depleting. There is a difference. I had forgotten about that difference. I should mention something about Lisbon itself. I had expected it to feel foreign in the uncomfortable way that cities feel foreign when you arrive with no anchor, no family, no social history, no years of accumulated familiarity. It did feel foreign, but not uncomfortably. More like a book written in a language you almost know. You can follow the broad movement of it. You can feel the rhythm, but the specific beauty of certain sentences only reveals itself slowly over time. I explored the city on foot. In the evenings after work, I would walk for an hour or 2 with no particular destination, through Alfama, along the waterfront, up through Barro Alto, down through Chiato. I started to recognize the woman who sold flowers at the corner near my apartment building. I learned which cafe had the best pastéis de nata within a 4-block radius of the office. I started picking up Portuguese in the involuntary way you do when you're immersed, not through study but through osmosis, through listening to Victor's phone calls, through ordering lunch, through overhearing conversations at adjacent tables. It was not a glamorous transformation. It was not the romantic expatriate story that sounds good in retrospect. It was mostly hard, and mostly quiet, and mostly the work of rebuilding a relationship with yourself when the person you had become used to performing for is no longer present. That's what I mean when I say it wasn't about Nora. It was about the version of me that had stopped performing and didn't know yet what was underneath. Nora and I had maintained a minimal, civil text exchange throughout the divorce proceedings. Practical things. A question about a shared investment account. Information about forwarding mail. One exchange about a mutual friend's wedding in June that we would both be attending and needed to coordinate around. Short, clear, warm without being intimate. The communications of 2 adults who had decided to treat each other with basic dignity. I respected it. I still do. But somewhere around month 2 in Lisbon, something shifted in the tone of her messages. They started arriving more frequently. They started containing questions that were not about logistics. "How is Lisbon?" she asked one night. I was sitting on the small terrace attached to my apartment, eating bread with cheese at 10 o'clock because I had worked through dinner. I looked at the message for a moment. "Interesting," I typed back. "Hard." "Good," she replied within a minute. "I'm glad." That was all. But the next week she asked again, "What's the food like?" I described the sardines and the wine and the small square near the waterfront where I had eaten lunch alone on a Tuesday, and watched 3 separate wedding parties cycle through for photographs. She responded, "That sounds beautiful." I didn't reply for a few hours. Then I wrote, "It is." Month 3 brought the first real professional breakthrough. We had been circling a major port authority contact in Baltimore for 8 weeks. The contact was a man named Harold Voss, mid-50s, 30 years in port operations, the kind of career bureaucrat who had seen 50 startups approach him with revolutionary ideas and had watched all 50 of them eventually apologize and withdraw. He was skeptical of Victor's company specifically because of its size. He had told us, politely and clearly, that he did not work with operations teams that could not demonstrate structural stability. Victor wanted to send a formal proposal deck. I disagreed. I argued that Harold Voss had seen 1,000 proposal decks and that the deck itself would register to him as evidence of everything he already suspected. Victor looked at me across the long work table. "What would you do instead?" he asked. "I'd fly to Baltimore," I said. "I'd sit across from him. No deck. Just operational specifics, case data, and a conversation." "That's expensive for an unconfirmed meeting," Victor said. "It's less expensive than 3 more months of email exchanges that end in the same place," I said. Victor considered this for about 10 seconds. "Go," he said. I flew to Baltimore on a Tuesday morning. I met Harold Voss in his office at the Port Authority headquarters on a Wednesday afternoon. I sat across from him with nothing but a printed 1-page summary and 2 years of operational case data. We talked for 2 hours. He asked hard questions. I answered them directly. I acknowledged the gaps in our current framework without apologizing for them. At the end of the meeting, he leaned back in his chair and said, "I appreciate that you didn't bring a deck." "I thought you might," I said. He looked at me with the specific expression of a man recalibrating an opinion. "Send me the formal structure in writing within 2 weeks," he said. "I'll consider it." I flew back to Lisbon on Thursday. Victor met me at the office Friday morning and said, before I had even poured coffee, "What happened?" "He'll consider it," I said. Victor was quiet for a moment. "That's more than anyone has gotten from Harold Voss in 3 years," he said. "I know," I said. "How did you do it?" "I thought about it. I stopped performing," I said. Victor nodded slowly, the way he nodded when he was storing information for later. The formal partnership with Harold Voss's Port Authority contact came through 6 weeks after that. It was not the largest deal we would eventually close, but it was the first one that carried real structural weight. It meant we were real. It meant the risk had a foundation. The team celebrated at a restaurant near the waterfront. Long table, too much wine. Katerina making everyone go around and say one thing they were proud of. Felipe nearly crying when Victor praised his contributions. Petra calculating the quarterly impact on a napkin because she was constitutionally incapable of not doing this. I sat at the end of the table and felt something that I can only describe as rightness. Not happiness exactly. Rightness. The specific sensation of being in a place where your efforts and your instincts and your actual capabilities are operating in alignment. I had not felt this in a long time. Maybe I had never felt it quite this clearly. I called Tom that night after dinner, slightly warm from the wine, standing outside the restaurant in the Lisbon night. "Something happened today," I said when he picked up. "Good something," he said. "Yes," I said. "You sound different," he said. "Different how?" He was quiet for a moment. "Lighter," he said. "Like someone took something off your back." I looked up at the Lisbon sky. Clear, the stars visible in a way they never quite were in Chicago. "Yeah," I said. "Don't mess it up," he said. "Define mess it up," I said. "You know what I mean," he said. And I did. The messages from Nora had continued to evolve. By month 4, they were no longer brief. She was writing paragraphs. She was describing her days. She had taken a new role at a design firm she'd been considering for 2 years, but hadn't pursued because of various reasons she now described as not real reasons, just comfort. She had started running in the mornings. She had gone to visit her college roommate in Austin for a long weekend. She was doing the same thing I was doing. She was rebuilding the outline of herself outside the shape of us. And I was glad for her. I was genuinely glad. But the messages kept coming. And they kept shifting. There was a message in month 4 where she said, "I've been thinking about the restaurant." I stared at my phone for a full minute. Then I wrote, "Which one?" She wrote, "You know which one." I set my phone down. I picked it up again. I wrote, "What about it?" She wrote, "I've been wondering if I said it wrong. I thought about that for a long time." Then I wrote, "You said it clearly. I think that was the point." She didn't respond that night. The next morning she wrote, "You're right. I did." Month 5 was when things shifted inside me in a way I hadn't anticipated. The work was harder, but better defined. I had found my rhythm in the city. I had a regular table at the cafe near my apartment on Sunday mornings. I had started cooking actual meals in my kitchen instead of eating bread and cheese on the terrace like a person staging a temporary life. I was not temporary anymore. I knew this because I had arranged to move out of the furnished Moraria apartment into a smaller place in Santos that was not furnished, which meant I had to buy things, which meant I was choosing what to surround myself with for the first time as an adult without the input or influence of another person's taste. It was disorienting and then quickly wonderful. I bought a bed frame and a kitchen table and a lamp and a rug that was entirely the wrong color for the room, and which I kept anyway, because I liked it. I bought a bookcase. I filled the bookcase slowly with books I bought from the second-hand shops along the Chiato streets. I hung the Big Sur photograph above the writing desk. It looked exactly right in that room. It looked like it had always been waiting for that specific wall. Nora called on a Tuesday evening in month 5. Not a text, a call. I was sitting at my new kitchen table eating dinner, actually eating, with a fork and everything. Her name appeared on my screen, and I looked at it for 2 full rings before answering. Hey, I said. Hey, she said. A pause. Is this okay? She asked. That I called. Yes, I said. It's okay. Another pause. I wasn't sure if it was the right. I wasn't sure you'd want to hear from me like this. I'm not angry at you, Nora, I said. I don't think I ever really was. She was quiet for a moment. I know, she said. That's sort of the thing I've been sitting with. What do you mean? You weren't angry, she said. You just went. You just did all of this. I had to, I said. I know, she said again. I know you did. I'm not saying it was wrong. What are you saying? I asked. She exhaled slowly. I'm just saying I've been trying to understand when everything changed, she said. Like when the version of you that I'm seeing right now, the one who resigned and moved to Lisbon and is apparently helping close deals with port authorities. When did that person become the person? Because I don't think I knew that person was there. I sat with that for a moment. The lamp I'd bought cast a warm light across the kitchen table. The rug in the wrong color was visible in the doorway to the other room. He was always there, I said. Why didn't I see him? She asked. And this was the question I had to be honest about. Because I didn't show him, I said. She was quiet. Why not? She said. Because showing him felt risky, I said. Because the life we had built didn't have room for someone who wanted to do things differently. And instead of saying that, I just got quieter and smaller. And I think you got frustrated with the quiet and the small, and you had every right to be. She didn't respond immediately. I heard her breathing on the other end of the line. I didn't know it was that, she said. I just knew something was wrong. I didn't know it was that either, I said. Not until I had to actually look at it. That night at the restaurant, she started. You did the right thing, I said. You said the truth. In the kindest way you could manage. It didn't feel kind, she said. No, I said. But it was honest. And I think honest was what I needed. Another long silence. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that 2 people share when they have finally arrived at a room they've been trying to find for years and discovered that neither of them is sure what to do now that they're actually standing in it. Are you happy? She asked. I thought about the question seriously. Something, I said. I don't know if happy is the right word yet, but it's the right direction. Good, she said. And she meant it. That's genuinely good. Are you? I asked. Getting there, she said. I took the new job. It's better. I know, I said. You mentioned it. Oh, right. A small pause. We've been talking a lot. We have, I said. Is that strange? She asked. A little, I said. But not badly. She laughed, a short, real laugh, and it sounded like something being set down after being carried too long. I should let you go, she said. You don't have to, I said. But it's okay if you do. Okay, she said. Good night. Good night, Nora. She hung up. I sat at my kitchen table in the Santos apartment for a long time after that, looking at the lamplight on the table, thinking about 9 years and $47.20 and jazz musicians and closed checkbooks. I want to talk about what I actually learned, because I've been circling it this whole time and I think it's time to land it directly. The marriage didn't end because either of us was villainous. There was no affair. There was no catastrophic betrayal. There was no single dramatic scene where everything collapsed. It ended because I had spent years building a version of myself that was optimized for approval. Callahan's, the company's, the neighborhood's, and yes, Nora's, and I had gradually hollowed out everything that didn't fit that optimization. I had become someone who was very good at being acceptable, And being acceptable is its own kind of disappearing act. Nora hadn't fallen out of love with a person. She had fallen out of reach of someone who had stopped fully showing up as one. I don't say this as an excuse. I say it because when I replayed that restaurant moment from Lisbon, from a different city and a different life, I could finally see it clearly. The chapter ending she had described was real, but it wasn't the end of the story. It was the end of a version of the story that we had both been maintaining out of habit, out of comfort, out of the very human fear of what happens when you stop pretending something is working. She had been brave enough to say it out loud. I had been stubborn enough to respond by finally becoming honest. In a strange way, we had both given each other the same gift, just in different languages. By the end of month 6, the Baltimore partnership had generated 2 direct referrals. Victor called me into his office. He'd finally set up an actual separate office, which was a development that had taken 4 months of subtle lobbying from Petra, and told me he wanted to formally restructure my role. Not restructure down, restructure up. You're running the Atlantic corridor, he said. Officially, with equity that reflects that. I nodded. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me, he said. You earned it the hard way, which is the only way this kind of thing works. I know, I said. Do you have everything you need here? He asked. I understood the question. It was not purely about resources. Getting there, I said. He nodded. Good enough for now, he said. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday morning. My attorney sent me a brief confirmation email with the official documents attached. I read the email at my desk in the office. I sat with it for about 2 minutes. Then I got up, made an espresso, returned to my desk, and opened the operational report for the Charleston contact that I needed to review before a call at 3 in the afternoon. I did not feel nothing. I want to be clear about that. There was a specific weight to it, the weight of 9 years of your life arriving at a legal timestamp. But the grief I had expected to feel in that moment had, I realized, already been distributed across the previous months. Across the Tuesday morning at the kitchen counter, the last day in the conference room with the mediocre cake, the February walk on Michigan Avenue, the night flight to Lisbon, the Sunday mornings at the cafe in Moraria, the Tuesday evening phone call at the kitchen table. Grief, I've learned, doesn't wait for the official moment. It moves on its own schedule, through small daily instances, and by the time the document arrives with the signature line, you've already done most of the processing. Or at least I had. Tom visited in month 7. He had accumulated vacation days at a scale that suggested he had been working without stopping for several years, which was accurate. I met him at the airport and drove him through the city toward Santos, and I watched him do what I had done on my first morning. Go quiet while the light and the buildings and the general strangeness of being somewhere that operates by different rules worked on him. Okay, he said, after about 15 minutes of silence. Okay, what? I asked. Okay, I get it, he said. What do you get? Why you're here, he said. Why this made sense. I looked at him. He was watching the trams. It looks like you, he said. The city. It looks like a city-sized version of whoever you were trying to become. I didn't respond immediately. We stopped at a red light. A woman walked past carrying a yellow bag, moving with the specific, unhurried purpose of someone who lives somewhere they belong. Yeah, I said. Something like that. We spent 4 days walking the city, eating well, arguing about deep dish again, and doing the thing that old friendships do when they're given enough time and space. They drop the social maintenance layer entirely and get back to the actual frequency of the connection. Tom met Victor, who he described afterward as someone who's figured out what their life is for. He met Petra, who intimidated him in a way he found oddly enjoyable. He met Felipe, who reminded him of himself at 24, which delighted and horrified him equally. On his last evening, we sat on the terrace of a restaurant in Barro Alto overlooking the city lights and the river in the distance. Are you going to stay? He asked. For now, yes, I said. And after now? I don't know yet, I said. I've stopped planning that far ahead. Tom looked at me with the expression he wore when he was processing something that required more than one sentence, but he was deciding whether it deserved the extra effort. He decided it did. You know what the difference is? He said. Between what? Between you now and you 2 years ago, he said. What's the difference? 2 years ago, you knew exactly what was coming next in your life, he said. Like to the month. And you looked like someone who was serving a sentence. And now you don't know what's coming next, he said. And you look like someone who's curious about it. I thought about that. Is that better? I asked. It's more honest, he said. We drank our wine. The river reflected the lights. Below us, The city moved through its Tuesday evening in the particular way it did. Trams, pedestrians, a couple arguing cheerfully on a corner, an old man reading at an outdoor table as though the city around him was a mild weather event he had no opinion about. "I'm going to miss you," Tom said. "I already missed you, but I'm glad you did it." "Me too," I said. Nora came to Lisbon in month 9. This was not planned. Or rather, it was planned the way things are planned when two people have been communicating with increasing frequency, and eventually a specific kind of honesty emerges, and one of them says, "I've been thinking about visiting Portugal," and the other says, "You should," and neither of them examines that exchange too closely for about 2 weeks, and then logistics are discussed. She stayed in a hotel in Chiado. We met for coffee on her first morning and spent 3 hours walking through Alfama in the late spring warmth, talking in the way we hadn't talked since probably the 3rd year of our relationship. Loosely, openly, without agendas. She told me about the new job. I told her about Harold Voss. She told me about the running, how she'd done a half marathon in March. I told her about the rug in the wrong color. She laughed at that. "Of course you kept it," she said. "It grew on me," I said. "You were always like that," she said. "You'd keep something impractical because you liked it and then be embarrassed about liking it." "I wasn't embarrassed," I said. "You were," she said. Not unkindly. About a lot of things. I didn't argue. We walked down a steep-stepped street toward the waterfront, the afternoon light turning everything gold. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask," I said. "Do you think we would have made it," she said, "if we'd both known earlier what we know now?" I thought about this seriously. I gave it the time it deserved. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe. But we'd have had to become completely different people, and those different people would have met each other differently, and there's no guarantee they would have worked either." "That's not a real answer," she said. "No," I said. "It's not. The real answer is that I don't think you can rerun it. It happened the way it happened, and we're both here." She nodded slowly. "Are you glad it ended?" she asked. "Are you?" I asked. She looked at me. "I asked first," she said. I looked out at the water. "I'm glad for what happened after," I said. "I can't separate that from the ending. They're part of the same thing." She considered this. "That's a good answer," she said. "Better than the last one." I said. "Much better," she said. We walked along the waterfront for another hour. We ate dinner at a restaurant near the Tagus, just the two of us, at a table outside where the evening came in warm and slow. There was no jazz musician. There was no checkbook. There was no chapter-ending sentence. There was just two people who had known each other for a long time, in a city that belonged to neither of them, eating well and talking honestly and sitting with the strange, particular tenderness of something that was fully over and fully okay. She left on a Sunday morning. I drove her to the airport. She hugged me at the departure's entrance, a real hug, held for a moment. "Thank you for showing me this place," she said. "Thank you for coming," I said. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," I said. She walked toward the entrance doors with her rolling suitcase. At the doors, she turned back once and raised her hand in a small wave. I raised mine. Then the doors opened, and she was gone. I drove back into the city in the Sunday morning quiet, through the streets that were mine now in the way that streets become yours not through ownership, but through daily accumulation. The turns you make without thinking, the shortcuts you discovered yourself, the specific quality of morning light at a familiar junction. I parked near my apartment building. I sat in the car for a minute. Then I went upstairs, made coffee, stood at the window with the cup warm between my hands, and looked at the Santos rooftops in the morning light. The rug in the wrong color was on the floor behind me. The Big Sur photograph was on the wall above the desk. The bookcase was 2/3 full, and I already knew where the next books would go. I have been asked, several times since, what the lesson is. People want a lesson. They want the thing you learned distilled into something portable, something they can carry away and apply. I understand the impulse. I used to want that too. Here is what I can offer, which is not a lesson so much as an observation. There is a version of comfort that is just fear wearing better clothes. And there is a version of stability that is actually just the accumulation of all the things you have agreed to instead of the things you have chosen. I had been living in a very well-furnished version of the second thing for a very long time. The restaurant in Chicago on North Wells Street didn't break something that was whole. It named something that had already been quietly breaking for years. And sometimes the naming of the thing, even when it's painful, even when it comes from someone else's mouth across a candlelit table in a moment you will never fully stop carrying, is the most useful thing that can happen to you. Not because it confirms your worst fears, but because it frees you from continuing to maintain the performance that had been exhausting you both. Nora said the chapter had ended. She was right, but she didn't know, and neither did I, that the ending of one chapter is also, always, the first sentence of the next one. The last thing I want to say is this. I'm not standing here telling you I became someone extraordinary. I didn't climb a mountain. I didn't write a novel. I didn't achieve anything that would make a list or fill an inspirational caption. I took a job that scared me. I moved to a city that didn't know my name. I built something from scratch with people who had no reason to trust me until I gave them one. I sat across from Harold Voss without a deck and answered his hard questions directly. I bought a rug in the wrong color and kept it because I liked it. I stopped performing acceptable and started doing real. Those are small things. Individually, every single one of them is a small thing. But small things, accumulated in the right direction, have a way of eventually becoming a life. A life that fits. A life that, when you stand in your kitchen in the morning with a cup of coffee looking at the rooftops you have come to recognize, feels like yours in a way that is specific and true and not dependent on anyone else's approval of the view. That is what I can tell you. That is what the checkbook and the resignation letter and the flight and the rug and the $47.20 all add up to. Not a triumph, just a truth. And finally, the courage to live inside it.